All right, welcome here on Living Energy Day. We're in the home stretch here, about the final three interviews, and I'm very pleased that we've got Stephen Ross from the World Research Foundation with us. And I had the great pleasure to meet Stephen maybe 4 or 5 years ago when I was in Sedona, Arizona, and to tour his magnificent library out there, which is open to the public and has books dating back to, I think, 1492 or even beyond. And it's just a wonderful resource for if you've got an issue, contact the World Research Foundation, and they've got materials and research that they're happy to send you for almost nothing. I mean, it's amazing what Stephen's doing. So I'm just going to jump in and let Stephen tell us about his work. He's a better source than I am to tell us about what he's doing. Stephen, great to have you.
Thank you, Mike. And firstly, I want to thank you for this opportunity to be sharing with your audience what we're doing, and I truly appreciate it. I'd like to begin by telling you that when I was running in college, I was running 100 meters, 200 meters on scholarship. I sustained a knee injury. I was sent to the sports physician for the Rams, the Dodgers, the Lakers in the Los Angeles area. It was 1968. The doctor examined my knee and he told me that I'd have to have surgery or I would never compete again. Well, I was very disgusted. I didn't like the idea of surgery, but back in my trainer's room, there was a Popular Mechanics magazine. Has nothing to do with medicine, but I read about a technique from Russia. Well, I called Dr. Kurlin. I said, have you heard about this technique? Do you think it would work? And his response to me was, that'll never work. It is holistic garbage. And I asked him, what do you know about it? He said he didn't know anything about it, but since it wasn't from America, it wouldn't work. Well, I decided to try it on my own. I missed 4 weeks of training. And that year, I ended up running in the national level for Division II and placed 5th and became an All-American. Well, it planted a seed for me, Mike. Why did this expert say that this technique I decided to use wouldn't work? And what other techniques and therapies exist around the world that we're not aware of? And because of that event, I ended up going around the world, making contacts, and looking at all of the different therapies and techniques that existed around the world that really we here in America did not have access to. And that was the beginning of the formation of the World Research Foundation. And the idea was that I wanted to have a place, and I co-founded this organization with Vern Bachman, but we wanted to have a place where people could go and discover all of their options and wouldn't have to be fortunate to find a magazine or book that they wouldn't have any idea the information would be there. So our concept was to discover every therapy technique that exists all over the world, from cow dung therapy to chemotherapy, and then let people know what their options are for more than 350 diseases and illnesses.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I've ordered a couple of your books there. I mean, they're not books; they're just Xerox pages off of hundreds of books, right? Yes. How does that work?
Well, what we've done is we have more than 20,000 books in our library dating to 1492, as you've mentioned. And what we do is for different diseases and illnesses, my staff has gone through all of the books and then look at acupuncture, color, magnetism, herbs, vitamins, whatever it is. And we've copied excerpts out of books so that some of our packets are more than 500 pages thick. So if somebody received a prostate cancer packet, it would be equivalent if they read 100 books, because we've got 4 or 5 pages out of each book. So again, for more than 350 diseases and illnesses, somebody is going to know what has been successful. Now, just so people will understand, the information is coming from medical doctors, health practitioners, So it is very, very good information, but a lot of the times your medical specialist is not going to tell you what's in those packets. So we have been doing this since 1984, and we've supplied, believe it or not, now more than 500,000
Wow.
packets over these years.
Wow. They're tremendous value. I mean, that there's like, it seemed like it was like $40 or $50, maybe $10 shipping that I paid for maybe $400 on, 400 pages on a condition. So it's really just your cost. You're a nonprofit, right? So you're pretty much just covering your cost of materials.
That is correct, and we've really kept it down so it can be affordable for people. But the true concept is options. We do not recommend, Mike, we do not push anybody to any particular direction. The idea is you have options, you can make an informed decision. I'd say perhaps the saddest things I've discovered since I've been in this business is when I'm at a party, someone walks up to me, a woman said, do you think I should have had my breasts removed? And it's like, you really can't answer that. The person is already done. And unfortunately, this was a person who did not have cancer, but was doing this preemptive type approach. So what can you say to that? I prefer that people become informed, really recognize the percentages. We've been doing this now, again, I have been in this field since 1972. Even though the foundation was formed in 1984, I've traveled all over the world. There are a lot of things going on that people here are just not familiar with.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we started this event about 5 or 6 years ago before we had met, and the goal was kind of to let people know what's going on around the world, obviously in a much less rigorous way than you've done, but again, kind of kindred spirits at least, and trying to just share the information just so people can know what's out there. So that's such a valuable resource. And I recommend it to everybody I know that's interested in holistic. If they have a condition, I'll tell them, I'll give them your website and say, you need to call these folks, get your research material.
Well, thank you for that. And again, that was our dream and our goal to get this type of information. And again, we're collecting the good, the bad, and the ugly. In other words, our packets are going to have the positive as well as the less than positive. I hate to use the word negative because everything is the same, but just different in degrees. So it will allow somebody to know whether or not it is going to be effective for them. But I would like to jump in and say that although that is, those packets have things dealing with material, physical objects. I still believe very strongly in the power of mind, belief, and that has been a very important aspect of my life, is not only the physical characteristics that are involved, but also the strength of our mind and belief. So our library also has a tremendous amount of information dealing with the power of placebo, thought, faith, because I know how effective that has been over thousands of years also.
Actually, yeah, and also you're kind of in your own right, kind of an expert, I know, in color therapy, and you've promoted a lot of the Dinshaw work and other things there. And is that something you'd like to talk a little bit about?
Absolutely. I was first introduced, well, I should back up a little bit and say that in 1979, I had a dream. And in that dream, I was told, or I believed, that color therapy would be effective. And I remember calling my dad, who was an engineer for Lockheed Aircraft, and I said, you know, Dad, I had this unusual dream that color could be effective for health conditions. And my dad, in his very scientific way, said, Steve, how are you ever going to figure out colors? What colors are going to work? There's so many colors. And it wasn't, gosh, more than 6 months after that, I came across the work of Dinshaw Ghadiali, who basically had an incredible 12-color system that he had developed in the late 1800s. And it was a full system addressing more than 320 health conditions just by using visible color. I will say that over the years, I have probably, I'm going to be very careful of my choice of words. Instead of saying treated, I have shared with more than 1,000 people color therapy. I have watched how it has worked for 1,000 people, animals who were not positive thinking. And the results of using color, Mike, has been so profound, so overwhelming in its simplicity and in how effective it is. But in 1984, my father had back spasms. He checked into Kaiser Permanente in Los Angeles. They did tests on him, and actually based on his tests, they used an unsterilized needle. My father ended up with an infection in his spine, C7, at the C7 spot. They did neurosurgery. After the surgery, they told my mother they were very sorry. It was not as effective as they wanted. They would start my dad on, well, he was a full quadriplegic training. Well, we decided to go in with color therapy. I had met with the head of neurosurgery, Dr. Mahomar. I told him about color. We brought the color in. We used it twice a day for 1 hour on my father. And my dad, 6 weeks later, walked out of Kaiser Permanente on 2 canes. Once we got him home, I hooked him up to a machine called the multiple wave oscillator, a frequency device. And 5 weeks after that, he was driving a stick-shift car and was fully functional. So color therapy, electromagnetics, what they provide for people, not only now, but historically is very special. But yes, the color has a very, very special meaning for me, especially with that experience with my father.
Yeah, I remember that story, and that's such a wonderful tale and true life story of just how important it is for us and how much is out there. And I mean, just think of what the average family would go through in that case, and they would have had to deal with a quadriplegic father for the rest of their lives just because they didn't know this basic information that's been around, as you say, thousands of years. And we tend to think this is the alternative medicine. Actually, no. What we call medicine is the alternative to what's been used for thousands of years, and you've got the proof of that in your libraries and your research.
Absolutely. You know, Pythagoras used color in 530 BC.
Wow.
Of color. And when I'm lecturing with medical professionals, there will always be a doctor who will go, blah, blah, blah. I don't know about this color therapy. And I'll say, doctor, what do you do for premature babies with bilirubin, infant liver syndrome? Well, and then they stop and I go, you put them under a blue light now, don't you? And the doctor will, yes, well, I don't know what you call it, but I'd call that color therapy. If you're using that blue light, that's color therapy. Same as what we're talking about. And imagine that in the 1920s, more than 500 medical doctors in the United States were using color therapy before the AMA basically banned it from doctors using it because their explanation was it couldn't possibly work, therefore you can't use it or you're going to lose your license. So in our libraries, we have the reports of these doctors and the results over time. It is very, very profound.
And you've written a book too. You might mention briefly. That's just a wonderful book. And that's the way it wasn't, or something like that. I don't know if I have the title right.
The book is "And Nothing Happened."
That's right.
Make it happen. And what I've tried to do is tell the stories of some of the great practitioners throughout history. Din Shagidali with his color, Bjarne Nordenström, the chairman of the Nobel Assembly in Sweden, who shrank cancer tumors with electricity with no side effects. Other great practitioners, Royal Rife and the Rife microscope, where the Rife frequencies were used. I wanted people to see the historical significance of electromagnetics and frequency. And we have so much original data that is what I think makes us a little bit different. We just don't write on these subjects. We have a lot of original background material.
And that's really important, because there is a lot of goofy stuff in the quote unquote alternative world, as we know, and there's a lot of people putting out Rife machines and things like that, and yet you've got the data that really talks about what really Rife was doing, as much as we know, right? And so we kind of know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have more than 500 personal letters of the doctors back and forth from the time. We have his work logs. We have a book of his original book of his frequencies. I had the only Rife microscope, the original universal, for 4 years. So I'm very familiar with the story. And I will have to say, in the 30-some years since I had that microscope, 99% of the information out there about Rife and what he did is nonsense. In fact, when I give presentations, I like telling the story. When I was a young man, there was a game, I think, called Chinese Secrets, and the teacher would line up the class and whisper something in the first child's ear, and every child whisper down to the last, and by the time it came out, it was such garbage. And this is what happens with Rife. People have made up their stories, taken from other people's websites. They do not know what they're talking about, but the epitome of this is, when I was in Los Angeles, I'm now in Sedona, one day I took a call, my staff was busy, and the woman on the line said, "I heard what happened to your founder," which is me. I thought, "Oh, what did you hear?" And she said, "I understand he was shot dead as he left his house in the morning because he had the Rife microscope." And I said, "Really? Where did you hear about this?" And she said, "Well, I was with a group of people at a rec room, and we saw a movie about Nikola Tesla with Orson Welles. And then when it was over, this man got up and told the story of the founders of the world research and the microscope, and they were gunned down and the microscope was stolen." And I said to her, or she said to me, "Did you know him, Steve?" And I go, "Yes, actually, I know him pretty well. In fact, I saw him in the mirror this morning." And she paused a second. She goes, oh, you're Steve." I go, "Yes, I'm Steve. And the story you heard was obviously not true." There was so much just junk out there. A lot of again, because of having the original materials, the letters from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, being very, very familiar, what is being done today with the majority of the devices is not what Rife was doing. So whether it's color, whether it's Rife, in my book, I have a lot of original material on Rife. The idea is just trying to set the record straight and going to source material when possible.
Yeah, I'll have to ask you offline because it'd be too technical, but I do have an electrical engineering background, although I've forgotten more than I've known of it. But so I think I have an idea of how these things would have to work, but I'll have to ask you that offline because that would be too far afield. But no, it's I've seen some of the, like the sign-in logs from the doctors that were all celebrating Rife, the major doctors in the country, and then a year later they're all denying they were at the dinner.
Well, you have a great memory because, yeah, I have actually the original picture in 1931 where the who's who of doctors of the world had gathered to celebrate virtually the end of disease and illness. They had found a frequency for 60 diseases and illnesses. And again, for those in your audience who might not be familiar, and a quick scenario, if somebody thinks about when a singer sings and hits a note, they are sometimes able to shatter glass. And so using that concept of resonant frequencies, the doctors in Rife's time had an idea of finding the frequencies that would devitalize or destroy the viruses. Now, they were able to get an idea of what color because Rife's universal microscope had the unique properties when they zeroed in on virus or bacteria, the virus or bacteria would glow in its own unique color. Once they had that color, they could get in the frequency range, have a frequency generator, turn the frequency dial while they were looking through the microscope. And when the color went out of the specimen, the virus or microbe was dead. So these doctors were celebrating this great discovery. Well, within 4 years, all of the 25 doctors, but 4 claimed that they were never at a dinner party. They didn't know anything about Rife. They knew nothing about a cancer cure. Well, that's interesting because not only do we have their picture, but we have Rife's original guest book where their names are clearly written in there. So I am never their judge. Those doctors had to make their own decision. Others of us, we make our decision on how far we're going to go, talking about things that need to be discussed. But I never really put down anybody else because people have families. They make decisions of what they want to say.
Yeah, I mean, we have, and I think that's really the shift that we all have to work towards, is we have such a system that's built around money. I mean, we're all so dependent on our paychecks or our income, and it skews everything to such a degree that we're all kind of trapped in it, kind of like one of those Chinese finger things where you try to pull out and it gets tighter. Yeah. They've got mortgages, they've got college loans, and all of a sudden they say, well, if we cure all the disease, what are we going to pay off these loans, you know? And so
you're right. I love that analogy with the Chinese. No, that is exactly it. And again, when you look at the commercials that are on TV, this is outlandish. You know, for hay fever side effect is slight, includes death. I'm going, really? That's a minor side effect, or heart. Or of course, my favorite ones are, if your personality changes, be sure to let your doctor know. We've gotten to the point where when I do consulting for people, they will come in with a problem. They will tell me they're on 7 medications, and the 4th or 5th medication has a side effect of what the original first medication was taken for. We have fallen into a period where, never mind, people are worried about the other type of drugs. We now have a society where people are drugged up to the extent that there is no drug that does not have a side effect. Every single medication has some sort of adverse effects. So I don't spend as much time as I used to about this because I prefer to accent the positive, the strength of our mind, our belief system, going through history, the people who have shown that through the strength of our will and mind, all things are possible. But we have really sunk down into this quick fix, which really is not a quick fix of anything.
Yeah, it's a fix of a very different kind, as we might say, right, getting in a fix. But yeah, I mean, it's so true. I mean, and we lose that so much in this everything's modern, and we have this false idea of progress. But just reading some of these ancient books, and even books 200 or 300 years old, the way people thought was just so different. They didn't live by the clock and by the dollar and all these things, and it just shifts the way we understand all of reality.
Well, that's a beautiful point, and I have the advantage as a glorified librarian with books going back so far that we tend to believe, because the ancients didn't have fast cars and a computer, that they didn't know what they were talking about. Yet when you go back to Pythagoras, who really he's been credited with the discovery of the right triangle, which is the cornerstone of all architecture. When you think that those ancient writers knew the distance to the moon within half a kilometer, I will tell you from my long time studies, and I really spend more time with ancient philosophies than lately I have with the color electricity. They were very profound. They understood more about nature, more about the world, more about the workings of the world than we do now. They understood that everything goes together, Mike. We are on a planet that is alive. We are working with elements and elementals, trees. Everything is alive. And when you are working with life and this interconnection, there is a bond between all of this which sustains us. And I really believe, even though your point was not quite here, and I've kind of maneuvered us over to the spot, because we have disconnected ourselves from beauty, nature, and natural earth energies, we find ourselves with this Chinese, that we need to go deeper and deeper to cover and mask what's going on because we're lost. We are completely lost. I have told more people to take their shoes off and walk in the grass and go to a miniature golf course and play miniature golf as a therapy, rather than tell them to get on some drug or medication. Go back to nature, go back to fun and how you were as a child.
Well, when you look at, like you say, what these people figured out, I mean, and last night Thornton Streeter showed a slide of a capillary or capillary, I think is what they say in English, the English say, but and then the meridian that they've actually discovered is actually like a fiber optic strand that was a fraction of the size of a capillary. And yet these people thousands of years ago figured out these things existed, and we just now discovered them in what, the last 20 or 30 years, that there physically is something there. So talk about brilliance, you know.
Wow. You've opened up another chapter in my book, which was and is that two aerospace nuclear medical doctors in Paris, France, Dr. Duras and Dr. de Vernajoul, used technetium-99, an isotope, and CAT scan cameras, and made visible the entire acupuncture meridian system in the human body. And they validated 100% the charts from 3000 BC. So now, following what you just brought up, how did those ancient doctors have those pathways so perfect? And these aerospace nuclear doctors was really profound because they injected the isotope at non-acupuncture points, and the isotope just coagulated in a pool. When they injected at the pathways, it went and followed the pathways perfectly at 3 centimeters a minute. So they did tremendous amount of tests. They were on my advisory board. I was in Necker Hospital. But aside from them validating acupuncture, I loved your point. 3000 BC, these people lay out the charts perfectly. They were seeing something more than like the energy fields that they were able to visualize.
Yeah, and he pointed out too the halos and all the holy pictures from all the religions, which represents the energy body, and the chakras, the way they actually mapped out the higher frequencies of each of the chakras as they ascended up. So these people were, and even the Old Testament, I tell people, my background is Christian growing up, and that the word for witchcraft and sorcery in the Old Testament in Greek is pharmakia, use of drugs, you know, so they knew there was something bad about drug usage way back then, you know.
There you go. No, there's a lot of things that the ancients looked at and bypassed. And it's interesting because if you even look at the early 1900s, I've written many articles. I do a lot of posting on Facebook about old techniques. We had the doctors who were using the sun therapy. They were having patients laying out and taking in the sun. Now people have been scared to the point where, oh my God, you're going to get skin cancer. They've gone the other way. Life we're going to find really is about balance. Jesus said the balanced middle path. For Buddha, it was the middle way. If we just would do a lot of these things in balance, we would have far less difficulties than we do. But we tend as a species to go overboard. It's like, well, if a little bit's going to work, let's just really ton it up. Let's just really pound it in. And we go one extreme to the other. So from going from too much sun, then people have a problem with too little sun and not getting enough of the vitamins from the sun, or at least that the energy. So I believe that with all these different things, and I haven't heard your previous people speak, but one thing I do find is sometimes a lot of the people who have these techniques, they go a little bit overboard. If you have a machine, you use it. If you're going to lay on a magnetic bed, you keep it continuously. That's really not the best way to address these situations. A balanced way is the best way, because it gives the body a chance to bring itself. You know, God created our bodies. They are the most magnificent devices and machines. And if we give it a half a chance, it's going to carry us a long way. But when we abuse it, it has a hard time.
Yeah, and really the concept of balance is really ties into the concept of frequency. Even our optometrist last night was talking about how the eyes actually move constantly, and they have techniques to stop the movement, and you go blind immediately when your eye quits moving. Yet we see a still image, but we have to have our eyes actually moving to see the still image. So, and balance really is. I mean, a movement is what, an oscillation between 2 points, a maximum and minimum, and it's really an ideal form of balance.
Yes, exactly. And with your background, with the science, with an engineering background, I believe that people have a much better idea of the workings. Cutting the body open and dissecting it, but killing the body, one never really knows how anything really works together. I'm using a really graphic, gross analogy, but the idea is when we're investigating anything, whether it is our bodies or the world, you have to look at something in its totality and while it's alive. And this was the big division of philosophy between Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle was really the beginning of the scientific. We're going to investigate. We're going to really keep going smaller and smaller and smaller until we've gotten so small we don't realize the grandness, the beauty of nature, universe, God, the planets. Plato, on the other hand, was pointing to universals. Look at the big picture, the universals, the ideal sphere. And so as we've gotten further and further away from the grandness and beauty into the smallness of trying to explain what beauty is, or trying to explain how big an inch is, we have, in my opinion, we've lost our way. And then in that myopic view, Mike, our vision gets locked. We tend to see only this small little piece, and our vision is smaller and smaller and smaller.
Absolutely. I've got a friend here who's a farmer. He took up farming, and he's been studying grass. He raises cattle, grass-fed cattle. And what he's understood from over-fertilizing, he said, well, he had the same idea. Fertilizer, some's good, more should be better. And he just had a terrible... What he finally has come to understand is that the whole economy of nature is fascinating. That insects have antennae because they can pick up the right plants to eat. They don't eat healthy plants. They eat bad plants. And so when you kill off all the bad plants, then the insects have to try to eat the good plants. And it's just this whole destruction of the whole economy of the soil we've done. And it's just like in life with our bodies.
If I have a minute, I want to tell you a quick philosophical story that's true from an old philosopher named Paracelsus, who was also regarded as one of the great alchemists throughout time. He was watching a pond that was outside of the house where he grew up. And he noticed that during the wintertime, that pond would freeze and the fish would go very, very deep. Sometimes they would die from the cold. During the summertime, that same pond got extremely warm so much so that sometimes you notice the fish died because just the heat of the water. But and he did this in 1512. He was trying to figure out if the sun is the same and the earth is the same and they don't change, why is this happening? And what he came up with, which was brilliant, was the sun didn't change, the earth didn't change, but the relationship between the two changes as we have the orbits during different times of the year. And his whole thing of medicine has to do with relationship. And that even works with people. Why is it that two couples can be married? Horrible. They divorce or separate. They come with new people. Everything is good. They may not have changed, but the relationships between two people. And so I use that basically in all phases of my investigation and what I'm looking at. It is about relationships, how one thing, and it's exactly, you led into that with what you were sharing there, that what seemingly, Paracelsus said, there is value in a bee sting, there is value in a snake bite. Now, at his time, they hadn't figured it out, but in our time, we have. Bee stings are used and started in Russia for people with multiple sclerosis. Everything has a place and a part. And that's why I can never say anything's bad or wrong, because for some other substance, it's positive and it's good. We just need to understand relationships one thing to another.
And that's why what you're doing is just so valuable, and so appreciated. The fact that you're bringing this information together, because we're so isolated. I mean, we know very little in America about anything in the world, partly because we're such a big country. They just tell us about what's going on here, but there's so much out there. I remember going to a business meeting years ago with these guys from Russia and Hungary, and we were way up in northern Canada, and they took me out doing the thing where you get in the sauna and then go out in the snow and then get back in the sauna. And that was wonderful. I mean, it's so invigorating, but who would think to do that down here in the South, you know?
That's right. No, and a lot of these things have been passed down. You had made a statement earlier, and it just really struck me, or it came to me when you said that when we look at what is really the alternative medicine and what should be standard. I remember when I was in Beijing, it was 1987. And I was on a personal tour of the Chinese academies of medicine and talking with different people. And I remember I was at a Chinese pharmacy, and the pharmacist says to me through a translator, "Why do you use alternative medicine?" And I said, "Well, alternative, no, we use our pharmaceuticals." He says, "Yeah, that's what I'm talking about." Those pharmaceuticals are 20 or 30 years old, and you don't even know what their effects are. He says, "My Chinese medicaments are 3,000 years old, and we know what works and what doesn't, what kills people, but yours is alternative." And I remember, it's all from your own viewpoint, isn't it? It's all relative to where you're looking from. Our pharmaceuticals to him were alternative, so...
Yeah, it reminded. I was fortunate to live in Atlanta for a long time with Robert Shaw was the conductor of the symphony there, and he's a beloved conductor in the choral music world and all. And he used to say that, why do they call this stuff like the Beatles pop music? The popular music is Beethoven and Bach, the stuff that the people have listened to for hundreds of years. That's what's popular, not this stuff that's right. Popular for 3 years and goes away, or 20 years. And it's so true, the perspective, just for the changing this perspective, we're so locked into these cattle trails of thoughts that just breaking those, it's just like a whole new world out there that we just don't want to see.
Well, Emerson said, when I find narrow viewpoints, I find narrow reading. And that is just for, it's relating to exposure. I had an office in Stuttgart for, oh my gosh, from 1987 until last year. And when the walls came down, when the East lost their control, we had some scientists come from Russia and from the former East Germany to our office in Stuttgart. and they came to my office staff saying, oh my gosh, we've developed these inventions and we have these discoveries in electromagnetics. And my staff people had to tell them, you know, those have been, well, they've been around for 30 years, but they didn't know because it was so new. But the caveat to this story was when my staff people offered them fruit, they did not know how to unpeel a banana, Mike. Some of those doctors, during that time when the Iron Curtain was there, they had never seen a banana.
Wow.
I had to wait for my staff to peel it to see how to eat it. That is the extreme example of closed-mindedness. But our same philosopher Paracelsus tells us the story that in his town in 1505, an individual had locked himself in his house, closed all the windows, sealed all the doors because he was afraid of the plague. Well, after some days, the town people were very concerned. They went in there and they found the man dead. Well, in those years, they couldn't figure out why did he die, but Paracelsus figured out it was because of the air. And he found that anytime you have a closed system, whether it is a house, whether it is a country, a religion, a philosophy, where there is no new air and energy coming in, you have stagnation, which leads to death. And it will hold for anything you can think of in this world. Anything that's so closed, which does not have either the light of day or energy or air, will eventually block, stagnate, wither, and die. So as we tend to become more ingrained in one approach, science a lot of times won't even admit when something new comes. In fact, there was a saying in Germany, it must not be because it cannot be. In other words, when they came across something that went against their laws, what they would say was, well, we're really not looking at what we're looking at because it must not be because it cannot be. And I used to laugh because I go, we're looking at this. No, it's not really what we think. So closed-mindedness, closed anything, leads to stagnation.
Absolutely. In fact, one of my favorite philosophers, Kierkegaard, and one of his sayings was that the possibility is the way the eternal expresses itself in time. And I thought that's a beautiful way to look at it.
Beautiful. Yes. No, there again, it's funny. People come to me and go, have you read this book by this so-and-so? And I'll go, was it written after 1890? Well, yes. And I go, no, I haven't. I do like and enjoy reading through the ancient writings because they are very profound, and a lot of them do not have vested interest attached to them like we have now. There wasn't the bias, there wasn't the afraid that we may not be looked at as the expert if we say, I don't know. The difference between the ancients and today is they would go out and investigate and attempt to find the answer regardless of where it led them. Today, we have our systems so locked in my personal opinion, that we lose all the investigative possibilities. Here's the equivalent I've used even for cancer research. Imagine you're brought to a new continent, Mike, and somebody says, okay, we want you to investigate, but you can only go north. That's the equivalent of saying, oh, we're going to find a chemical answer to cancer. We are going to keep pounding the pharmaceuticals till we find an answer. Well, no, that is the same equivalent of what I've given you. Instead of looking at the totality, a virus is a living organism. Anything that's living is bipolar. Anything that's living is magnetic and electrical. So when we segment, I guess that's what my point is. we limit ourselves. Make no boundaries is what I'd like to share as my important message for today. Make no boundaries. Always look at what more is possible. How high can we go? What is the highest and best? And I believe as a species, we're not even close to our limitations or what we can do. We believe the only way to fly is by an airplane. We believe that the only way to do this is to use our phone to communicate, as opposed to the deeper senses that we have. We don't know what we're capable of, but when you look through time, people have tried to tell us, but we kind of push them aside as no, they're ancient, they're old, they don't know. We are magnificent beings with unlimited potential.
Absolutely, it's so true, and that involves just as much looking in the past as it does looking forward. You know,
Absolutely.
because there's such a wealth of information, and that's why having somebody like you is so invaluable. And it's just great to have the resource that you bring to us with this library. And could you tell us a little bit about maybe what's the future plan for this library down the road? Have you got a long-term vision, or for your whole work with the foundation?
Well, the foundation will always be here to assist people to get unbiased, neutral information, because that's what we're providing. So the foundation continues. I myself have spent much more time in the whole aspects again of what is possible through dreams, what is possible through willpower, what is possible through being positive. And so we have tremendous resources. What I'm looking to do in the future is I will be working with a excellent producer, and we're going to be producing a series of videos from out of the library, stories of these ancient philosophers, stories of great inventors, but the caveat will be how they transcended the limitations of the day. Why did they come up with their great discoveries, Mike? Because they refused to accept that something was a limitation. And so the future, personally, is I will be doing many more programs, a lot of them over the internet, having to do with sharing with people about potential. But in regards to the World Research Foundation, we will always be providing information to people through the internet. People can order through the internet. They can call us up at our website, see the packets that they need, and they will get information that will help them in their final analysis. I don't believe anybody should force people into anything. So my mandate for the rest of my life, and since I was 20, has been option and going into great detail regarding, if somebody was to say, what is color? We want to get them as much information on color, electricity, magnetism, herbs, vitamins. And so that is not going to change. And I don't know if you want me to provide our website and telephone number, but certainly our foundation is called World Research Foundation.
Yeah, definitely give that out. We'll also post it. I've got it posted on the webpage where we'll put this video, but some people might just be listening to this in the car or something. So go ahead and get those out verbally too.
Yeah, the website is very easy. It's WRF.org, stands for World Research Foundation. And our telephone number is 928-284-3300. But I think a visit to that website at World Research Foundation, people can see the different information packets. I would like to also add that I believe the greatest teacher, guru that we have is our own inner self. I believe very strongly that this inner self, this higher self that we have inside, is our teacher. And when we listen openly, when we ask in a profound and open manner, and you know that's in scripture, when you ask, the information is given unto you. And if we ask in a very clear, open way of desiring to find an answer, I know that that answer is there. And this is why many people have said, well, somebody told me this, but I felt and I went this way. I was given information from this authority, but it just didn't feel right. We have to learn to go back to trusting ourselves and knowing that we are in direct contact with the creator of the creation who created us, and the answer is within us. I don't want this to come across as religious. I want this to come across exactly how it is. Spiritually, we are in touch with everything that exists, and everything can talk to us. And again, Paracelsus said, I know I'm harping on him, but he was brilliant. You want to know an answer? Sit cross-legged in front of an herb, a flower, a tree, the stars, and sit openly and don't talk, and the information will come. Our greatest teacher is our own self.
Absolutely, that's wonderful, and that's I love the whole message of the breaking limitations, and I really want to keep in touch with you about that for sure. And I've got some other things to share that I think will really be interesting for you in that regard. And so that's a wonderful thing to think about, and that's really what we're seeing with all the people I think on this event. These are people that have broken limitations. They've broken out and tried to go against the grain, and for most of us, it's not a remunerative sort of deal.
That's right. We've given away more packets, believe me, than we've ever charged for. And I have never charged for consulting or talking with people. My greatest feeling is to help someone, and especially when people say there was no hope or they didn't have an option, that there was a place they could get a little bit more information. Again, everybody's body is so different. This is why I never believe that one way is going to work for everybody who has the same condition. It just doesn't work like that. There's too many other possibilities. And I remember I was doing a radio call-in program, and a doctor called in on his car phone. He was extremely upset with the whole show. I have to say that the host was doctor bashing. I wasn't. I was just kind of sitting quietly. But this doctor called in. He goes, this show telling people, giving them false hope other than chemotherapy. And I said, look, doctor, can I ask you a question? He goes, yes. I said, there's only 3 ways I believe somebody can get cancer. One is their environment. The second is what they eat. And the third is their philosophy, basically. And he goes, I said, is that right? He goes, well, yes. I said, then doctor, why is it that you are not trained to talk about anything having, again, to do with herbs? You really don't talk with somebody about their environment. Do you talk with somebody and find out whether there's high tension wires or they live 3 miles from Love Canal? And what about how much psychology training? Well, he hung up right away. Those are the only 3 ways: your environment, your thoughts, and the food that you eat. And each one of these is going to have an effect on somebody, which is why I start with them and say, do you have a high tension wire outside your house? Do you have electrical boxes on the other side of the bed where you sleep? What is your diet like? We are individual people, and not just not a herd where everybody is exactly the same. So therefore, I'm looking at the time. I would like to leave people with my last philosophy of life, which is called LEFL, L-E-F-L. It stands for laughter, excitement, fun, love. Check your levelometer. If you're not doing those, there's a likelihood you'll be ill. You fill your levelometer, you're going to stay healthy.
Well, that's great advice, Stephen, and it's been a wonderful talk. And I really thank you for your time today and for all you've been doing for many years. And so again, thanks very much. Everybody, World Research Foundation, WRF.org.
Thank you, Mike.